Working from home sounds like freedom until the boundary disappears completely. There was a point, maybe 2 years into building my tutoring business, where I realised I hadn't left my house for work in over a week. Not because I was busy, not because I couldn't, but just because that boundary had completely dissolved. My office is in the back of the house, and I just used to drift in to do a quick job and emerge 3 hours later. And honestly, I didn't even notice it was happening. Hi, I'm Jane, the founder of Vivio Tuition, an online tuition business that supports students worldwide. Vivio Academy, offering tutors support to build a business that works with their lives rather than against it, and the host of the Tutor Edit. Now, over the last couple of weeks, I've been talking about some of the things that make running a tutoring business alongside real life genuinely difficult. A couple of weeks ago, it was the switching, that disorientating transition from family life to business decisions. Last week, I talked about the guilt that we can feel. This week, I want to talk about something that I think sits underneath both of those things: physical space. When I first started tutoring in libraries, the physical separation was built in. Like, I left the house, I worked somewhere else, and then I came home. That boundary existed because it had to. You know, my children were babies. There was no room in the house to have people around. It wasn't appropriate to have people in our home. And when I moved online, because it was convenient, the children were older, I wanted to be around for the school run, suddenly the laptop became my classroom, and it also became my office. It became my marketing department. It became the centre of my admin. Something happened that I didn't expect. The boundaries that I'd had disappeared. Not gradually, but almost immediately, if I'm being honest. And here's the thing that nobody warns you about. Everybody talks about the freedom that working online and working from home can give. And look, what we wouldn't have given as teachers to have that freedom. So I'm very grateful. But when you start an online tutoring business, you can work from anywhere, which is amazing. You can set your own hours, which is amazing. You can be at home with your children. And all of that is an absolute gift, and it's genuinely wonderful. I would not trade it for the world. But what that also brings, and what people don't talk about, is that working from home doesn't always feel like freedom, especially after a while. It actually feels like you're always at work. The kitchen table is where you eat your breakfast, but it's also maybe where you reply to parent emails. The sofa is where you relax in the evening, but it's also maybe where you're thinking about and planning your marketing strategy. Your bedroom is where you should be sleeping, but it's also somewhere where you occasionally check your phone, maybe at 11 o'clock at night, because you've just remembered something. And that creates a real blurred distinction. And it's something that we have to adapt to, particularly if we've been used to working in a classroom, that there's no boundary between your home life and work. And yes, we left teaching because that was absolutely the case in that scenario, but it's slightly different. And I know that I'm not the only person who's felt this, because nearly every tutor that I speak to describes some version of the same thing. Now, the shift for me didn't come from some grand strategic decision. It just came, if I'm being really honest, from a moment of frustration in a very ordinary situation. Like, I was trying to write. I was thinking, I think it was like a course outline or something, and I just couldn't focus. The house wasn't really noisy. Nobody was interrupting me because I was on my own at home. Everybody else was at school or at work, but my brain just kept drifting. Like I'd look at the pile of washing in the corner and think, oh gosh, I should really be doing that. Or maybe the dishwasher needed emptying, like something might have needed tidying. And then I'd start to think about what I needed to cook for dinner. And it was then that I clicked, like my brain didn't realize that I was at work because I was sitting in the same chair that I was used to scrolling on my phone. Like there was no signal. There was no like environmental cue that really signaled to my brain, like you are working now, like you're in work mode. And that was when I kind of thought, right, okay, something needs to shift. So I did something really small. I went to a cafe the first instance. Like I went to our local cafe, took my laptop, my notebook, a pen, and I just left the house to go somewhere that wasn't here. And honestly, I just felt like a real shift. I had that space and time of thinking, like, this is dedicated work time. Something definitely shifted when I moved out of the house. It really helped me to focus on what I needed to do. I was really focused on the task that I had to complete, like I was doing it properly. It was almost like I was working under pressure in some ways, that my brain just felt like it was flowing for the first time in quite a while. And I got more done in that hour or two than I had done in the previous couple of days combined, just because my brain was able to function. And the point isn't the space itself. I saw the benefit of working in a cafe a couple of days a week, and now go to a co-working space. Now, that helps me because when I walk through those doors, I have a very clear message in my brain, like we are at work now. It's also attached to the gym, which is quite useful for me because I can, go for a swim and just have that time to focus and really get things done. It signals that we're working to my brain. And when I leave, it also signals that work is over and I'm going home, and it enters a new phase. I enter my protected time phase. So if you haven't watched that episode, the previous episode, then take a look at that because that outlines the time structures that I use just to help me understand what I need to do and assuage the guilt that I sometimes feel for working. That I want to be really practical about this because I know that not everybody can rent a co-working desk. And honestly, for a long time, I would have been of the opinion, well, why would I want to spend £10 a day on a co-working desk when I could just work from home? But just moving to a different spot in the house where you can signal very clearly that you are working. Now, for me, that is this study. The issue for me is that I would just drift in here and get on with work because I wanted to, but also because I felt like I had to. So if you normally work at the kitchen table, like move to a different room. Like you don't have to have a spare room. It could just be a different chair to relax in, but make sure that when you are in your workspace that you are actually working and not kind of scrolling or kind of attempting to relax in some way, because psychologically it can just signal to your brain that you are in work mode, and it just helps with that physical separation because your brain associates space with different activities. Now the second thing is having a third space, and this is what I eventually moved to. I have a co-working desk in the gym. It could be a library. It could be a quiet cafe where they don't mind if you bring your laptop along while you have a coffee, particularly if you're a regular. Space that exists only for your business is really, really useful to have. Now, this does cost money. At the lower end, like a library is free. At the higher end, a dedicated desk or office space is obviously going to be a bit of a financial cost. But I want you to think about this not as an expense, but thinking of it as an investment in your ability to actually work when you're working. Think of it an investment in boundaries, because if you're spending 3 hours at home and only getting 45 minutes of real focused work done, which is, to be honest, what I was doing at that point, then a co-working space actually can give you that 3 hours of deep, uninterrupted work is worth the £10 a day that I pay. It was a really good investment for me. Now, what actually changes when you put these boundaries in place? Because the practical benefits are obvious. Like, we have better focus, we have more output, we think more clearly. But there were three things that surprised me. The first thing was that I became a better parent. Not because I was spending less time with the children, but because when I was actually with them, I was actually there. I was present. I'd done all of my checking emails. I wasn't really mentally drifting back to my to-do list. It was a really clear signal to my brain that I had left that working space and came home, and home became home again. I wasn't kind of like drifting back to what I hadn't done. The second thing was that actually it added a sense of like legitimacy to what I was doing, that was an external signal that what I was doing was a real thing. And that sounds a bit strange because, you know, we all run respected businesses, but people didn't see me on my laptop again. They saw me leave for work and then come home. And that was a real distinction, especially for my kids. Like, they saw that I actually had a job, which they do recognize. Like, absolutely. My children are quite young. They're 10 and 12 at this time. But it was a real distinction, and that mattered more than I expected, not just for them, but also for me, because I think in some senses it validated what I'd struggled to validate for myself, that this was real, that this was valid. The third thing that it offered, and this was probably the biggest one, is that I stopped resenting working. It had grown to a time when work was always in the house. It starts to feel like a real intruder in your personal space, like something that is taking up space that it shouldn't have. And that certainly it did feel like work had invaded our home. So when I did give it a space of its own, that resentment did start to dissolve a little bit, and it really made a big difference because it was somewhere else. It was external. Now, I'm aware that this episode might have felt quite practical, which hopefully it has. I still think that the emotional layer is there, because what we're really talking about isn't where you put your laptop. It's about giving yourself permission to take your work seriously. And often I think a lot of us, particularly as women and possibly as mothers too, we need that permission to take our work seriously. It isn't something that we're just trying to fit in around everything else, to be able to treat it as something that deserves its own space, that deserves time, that deserves boundaries. And I think that sometimes we can be resistant to that. We can tell ourselves that we should be able to do it all from the kitchen table or do it all at home, and that actually needing a sense of separation can be seen as a weakness. And, we just need to be more disciplined or more organized or more efficient. And if all of those things were true, then we wouldn't need to leave the house to focus. But that's not really true, and it never would be. It never has been, and it never will be. The tutors that I know who have the healthiest, most sustainable businesses are the ones who have built those boundaries into their working lives. And that is at whatever level you can afford. It could be just moving to a different room in the house. It's not about escaping your home. It's about choosing where your work belongs. And that's really the critical thing. If you've enjoyed this episode, then I would love it if you would like and subscribe so that you don't miss out on support, strategies, and occasionally some inspiration to help you grow a tutoring business that fits and feels aligned with real life. I've put together a review guide for you, and these questions will just help you to identify what you would like to change, what is working well, and some tweaks that you can improve without any pressure, no kind of grand overhaul, just as a starting point. Now, you can grab this using the QR code here if you're watching on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, I will link it in the show notes for you. I've loved talking to you about boundaries today, and I look forward to seeing you all again in the next episode. Thank you.